Okay, we're gonna do my reflective discussion for Game Engine. Talk a bit about project, how it went, and some of our other stuff with it. A lot of our kind of discussion topics we had from like previous videos are still the same. So like our project organization is still being done the same way. If you do work on a specific script, you put it into the folder meant for it. So if it's a script that handles some part of the UI, it goes into the UI folder. If it's a manager, it goes to the manager folder, and so on, so on. It was the same with like when we were managing scenes and prefabs. If we used a prefab, we drag it down into our prefab folder so that anyone else who needed it could grab it. And then that would be kind of similar. Since we only used the one scene for this last sprint, if we were working on different stuff at the same time, we'd branch off into separate branches just so we don't break anyone else's stuff and affect it. Other than that, I didn't really, since this was our last sprint, it was meant for like more of like a polish and just fine tuning the game, fixing bugs. We weren't doing much coding really, especially since I was the game designer. I was mostly in charge of just playtesting everything, making sure it felt good, felt right, and if it didn't, figuring out why and figuring out how to fix it. So I don't know how well it would work for Game Engine, but I did work on technically two different things for it. So the first one was this little particle, it's not a big one, but just this little particle effect on our ore prefab, which I used to kind of give our ores just a bit more of a polished touch to them as you're depositing them. So since I've never learned how to make particles, it's not amazing for a first time, but it is in our game here. And the second kind of thing that I worked with for Game Engine was with our player manager because we had a bug on the player input manager where people were able to join at any time and not just in the character select like we had wanted it to. So fixing this took us a while of messing around with it, trying to figure out what it was, as well as getting some help from one of our teachers to bounce ideas off with. In hindsight, the issue was a lot simpler than we thought it would have been to fix, and we probably should have been able to figure it out pretty quickly. But it's just one of those things that kind of went over our head and we didn't figure it out. But our kind of fix for that bug was first off was figuring out, we could just turn the joining enabled by default button off at the start, which immediately stopped players from joining whenever, which again should have been something we looked at straight off the bat. But then our second thing that we did was set up our player manager as our prefab, not prefab, as just like a private serialized field here, and then we would, when you were in the character select stage, we would enable joining, and then otherwise we disable it, which would stop players from joining in like the gameplay state or anything like that. And so the only time they could join would be in the character select, which is a very small, very simple fix. But again, it's just one of those things that we just kind of didn't think about when going through this. But at the end of the day, we did fix it. We did get it to finish, get it working. But yeah, other than that, realistically, everything else that I did for the project for this front was just fixing bugs or just doing a little polish. So I didn't interact with the engine part of this at all. So like, other than messing around with the player input manager, which was one of my first times looking at it since another programmer was the one that set it up, I didn't use any other engine features, aside from the particle effect that I made. I didn't write any tools or like extensions during this time to like help with our stuff. We didn't end up making any like game engine related changes either because we didn't need to. I guess next little bit, I guess I can just reflect on some lessons learned. So I don't know what I was expecting going into a group project. I figured there'd be, a bit of turbulence at the start as we all kind of got into it. Since I don't, for the most part, all of us have only worked in like small groups at a time and not for like a long duration. So yeah, at the start, I think, we had some pretty rough communication, pretty rough, teamwork. But as we went through the sprint, everything got a lot better. So I guess just the first lesson is that, team projects can definitely be a little more complicated and challenging than you may think. And yeah, I guess the second point here, since I was the game designer, I also kind of didn't know what to expect going into this. So I feel like I was just kind of running around trying whatever and hoping something would stick. I think I figured kind of the game design would be a bit easier of a role, but I do think it also didn't end up as easy as I thought it would have been. Because even though I was kind of in charge of, the direction of our game, where it would go, I feel a lot of the time we were bouncing stuff back and forth between all of us on the team, so it ended up being less my kind of designs and more of everyone's designs, which I do think ended up working well by the end of it, just because instead of it all kind of relying on me, I want to make sure I'm not putting in like dumb decisions and stuff or stuff that wasn't going to work. So I think it definitely worked well to bounce it off of teammates first, make sure there wasn't a dumb change I was looking at adding. Let's see. I guess kind of another small lesson is just teamwork is hard. A lot of people manage to make it look easy, but depending on who you team up with, that communication and that teamwork between everyone isn't always going to be really easy. So, you're probably almost always going to run into issues unless you're working with a group of people that you know very well and have worked with before. There's always going to be those hiccups that you run into as you're trying to figure out how everything's working, how stuff is going to go. I think I kind of figured at the start it wouldn't be too bad, but as we went on, there was definitely a lot of issues that popped up, between, time management, communication, and just stuff not getting done when it should have. But it didn't end up being too bad. Let's see. I guess last lesson learned for this would be playtest very frequently. Get as many people as you can to playtest because it will very much help you out in the long run. So for our game, we did not have as many people playtest the game as we should have outside of just our team and the designated blind playtest that we had hosted. I think if we had been able to, have more people test it than just us, some of these bugs and issues that did pop up near the end, we could have fixed much sooner. Since, as the creators of the game, sometimes you tend to completely be blind to any bugs or issues or stuff like that you may run into. Whereas somebody else who's never seen the game before might immediately notice that, which is something that could have definitely helped, especially on our last day of the project where myself and our other programmer had our teachers as well as some outside people test our game. They were finding all sorts of different bugs and stuff that could have been better, which we ended up spending that entire day going through and fixing all of that. And we definitely could have had it done much sooner had we came in and had people actually do that more than just the day of. So yeah, going forwards is if I ever work in really any project, whether it's a solo project or whether it's a team project, I'll definitely want people to test it a lot more because it will benefit the project tremendously as a whole.